For about a year and a half, I, a 22-year-old male, dated my ex, a 23-year-old male who was Native American, specifically Navajo. Our relationship got serious enough that we introduced each other to our parents. He and his family lived close to our college, so I would go over there quite frequently for dinner or just to visit. During spring break, his parents invited me to come with them to a log cabin that they and their extended family had rented for a weekend. I accepted, and honestly, I got kind of excited, as I felt like my boyfriend and I were moving up in our relationship. I also could count the number of family vacations that I had taken growing up on one hand, so there was that. The night before we drove to the cabin, my boyfriend's parents invited me over for dinner, and after, they sat me down to talk to me about the next couple of days. I already knew my boyfriend's grandparents were extremely in touch with Navajo traditions, and they could be harsh to certain people they saw as outsiders. They basically explained to me that they may not accept me immediately, and that they apologized if at any point they offended me. I thought about what they said the entire drive to the cabin, and it honestly only made me even more nervous the closer that we got to our destination. Meeting my boyfriend's family for the first time was stressful enough, but adding on the fact that we were the same gender, and that his family may view me as an outsider, made my chest unbearably tight. As we drove up to the cabin, immediately we saw that there was a group standing outside of it. My boyfriend's dad parked the car. He and his wife jumped out to run over to the crowd to see what the issue was. The yelling was so loud you could hear it almost clearly, despite us still being in the car. I asked my boyfriend who the people were, and he said they were all different family members and that a serious argument must have broken out. We got out of the car and walked around to the front of it so we could see what was going on. It looked like it was about 9 people yelling at one guy. The guy had his back to us, but I remember his bizarre way of standing. It's hard to describe, but if I had to give it a comparison, it would be Mr. Crocker from The Fairly Odd Parents. The argument was so heated, it looked like nearly everyone was ready to start throwing punches. Finally, the guy with his back to us yelled something before turning and walking in our direction. I thought he was walking directly towards us, but then I realized he was on the path to walking past us. As he walked by me, I remember he looked at me really quick, and we made eye contact. His hair was long and shaggy and it came down over his face, but I could still see his eyes. They looked immensely glazed over, like the guy was beyond high. Despite nothing technically being off about him, it just felt like I had looked into the eyes of a mannequin or something. Getting over my uneasiness, I noticed the guy hadn't walked to a car, but instead had continued to walk until he walked into the woods. I turned to my boyfriend and asked where he was going, and who that was, and he said that he was pretty sure it was one of his uncles, but he hadn't seen him since he was a kid. We both assumed the guy had maybe went to blow off some steam, or walk off a high. My boyfriend's parents came back and said everything was fine now, and that we could take our bags out of the car to head inside. Log cabin was honestly an understatement. The house that they had rented for the weekend was massive. It had enough rooms where everyone's personal family had their own rooms. I was beyond shocked to learn that my boyfriend's parents had gotten us our own room, although it was the smallest. We settled down and then I got to go around and meet my boyfriend's family. Unexpectedly, everyone was beyond nice. I kind of felt like I'd be treated like an outsider, given how traditional my boyfriend had said his extended family was. But nearly everyone that I met greeted me with a giant hug and a warming smile. I guess the two exceptions were my boyfriend's grandparents. Both seemed very contained and had this very serious look on their faces. As I approached them to introduce myself to them, they both looked me over a couple of times before moving. Soon, they both stood and gave me a very strong-handed handshake and a pat on the shoulder. It wasn't a dream come true, loving welcome, but it was at least a gesture of acceptance. As the night went on, everyone in the house talked, drank, ate, and even had a period where one family member brought a guitar out, and we all drunkenly sung covers of popular songs. I had an amazing time, and it was definitely a night I wouldn't forget. I do, however, remember this tense feeling that was with me the entire night. Like something was around me, but I couldn't see it. The night flew by, and before long, it was sometime after 1 a.m., and everyone was ready to go to bed. And before anyone made their way to the room for the night, my boyfriend's grandfather called everyone into the living room for a family meeting. I figured I was a guest, so that included me. But before I was able to grab a seat, several male family members told me that I wasn't allowed to be here for this and that I had to go upstairs. I was kind of disheartened by this, but I made my way up to my room. To be fair, I wasn't alone, as the Caucasian wife of some member of the family was also not allowed to sit in on the meeting. I went upstairs, showered, and went to my room to mess around on my phone until my boyfriend came upstairs. While I waited, I got a sudden surge of anxiety. I don't know where it came from, but my heart just started racing, and it felt like I was about to cry. It lasted for only about a minute or so, but it freaked me out big time. After it ended, I sat there confused and slightly shaking. My boyfriend walked in, and seeing him settled me down. I didn't feel the need to mention it to him, as he would definitely laugh at me. He showered. We talked for a bit about the day. We did what a couple of teens do when in bed at night, and then we both went to sleep. That night, I shot up out of my sleep. I wasn't having a nightmare. I wasn't even having a dream. Suddenly, I was awake, and I vaulted out of bed. Standing there, I was confused as hell as to why my body had jolted itself awake. I thought maybe my boyfriend had kicked the crap out of me, or suddenly snatched all the covers, but when I looked down at him, he was calmly snoring with my side of the covers thrown over him from me vaulting awake. I looked at the clock. It read 4:10 a.m. I was kind of freaked out by my weird wake-up, but I realized that I had to pee, so I threw on my t-shirt and shorts and left our room to make my way to the bathroom at the end of the hallway. After doing my business, I walked out of the bathroom and into the hallway. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, and it sat next to a window. I stopped at the window to take in the nighttime scenery. I looked at the moon casting light over the family's parked cars. What stole my attention away from the cars was a figure moving among the crowd of vehicles. I couldn't tell what it was, but I just watched as it walked up and down the rows of cars. I figured it was somebody maybe looking for their car in the darkness of the night. But as my eyes adjusted, the figure clearly wasn't walking like a person. It looked like a black dog or a wolf or something four-legged. We were in a heavily wooded area, so I figured it wasn't abnormal for wildlife to wander close to the house. But then the figure stood up. It didn't stand, wobbled around, and then planted its front legs in the ground. It stood and continued moving through the rows of cars. I watched as the thing walked with a stiff gait around the vehicles, before it just stopped to face the house. The darkness seemed to coat the creature, as I couldn't make out any of its features other than its outline. And then it simply looked up at me. Not in the sky or up at the house, but at me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me directly. From its dark form, I saw two small white dots on its head. Just two pinpoint-like dots that stared at me from outside. I don't know how long we stared at each other, but what I do know was that, before I knew it, I was walking downstairs into the front door. I just moved. No reason or want to, but my body was suddenly in motion. As I unlocked the front door, an iron-like hand grabbed my wrist so hard that it hurt. I looked over and saw my boyfriend's granddad, standing there staring at me with a look that I'll never forget. He didn't say anything. He just relocked the door and turned me to face him. I saw him place something against the door, before he pulled out something from his pocket with a light. He had lit it and circled it around my head, saying something under his breath. I remember being utterly confused but just completely submissive to whatever was going on. As he finished, he used his fingers to put out whatever he lit and told me to go back upstairs. Slowly, I moved back toward the stairs, but as I turned around, I saw him pick up what I realized was a shotgun from off the doorframe. I walked upstairs and I stopped before entering my room. I looked at the window and didn't even have to walk over to it to know that that thing was still out there. I laid back in bed, and after about 30 minutes of ceiling watching, I went back to sleep. It was easily the worst sleep I had ever gotten. I had what felt like 24 hours worth of nightmares that was just me running from something. I was running in slow motion and could hear something fast running after me. Right as I heard it get to me, the dream would restart. I woke up later that morning around 10 a.m. or so and saw my boyfriend was covered in sweat as he slept. He never sweated while he slept, and the room was a cool 64, so I found it disturbing. I literally had to shake him for about 5 minutes before he woke up. At first, he was just dreamily staring straight ahead before he registered that I was looking over him. I can honestly tell you that my boyfriend is a part of our college's ROTC program, and he is used to waking up early. 99% of the time, he would wake up about 2 hours before me when he slept over. Not to mention in the rare cases that he did sleep longer than me, he would snap awake whenever I touched him. He lazily got dressed before we both went downstairs to find the entire house in a dreamlike state. Everyone moved through the house like zombies, and everyone seemed half dead. Before anyone worked on breakfast, my boyfriend's grandfather called for another family meeting. I was still not allowed to listen, but this one lasted much longer than the one previous. When it was over, my boyfriend and his parents told me that we were packing up and leaving. I couldn't argue, as everyone in the house simultaneously moved to the rooms to pack up their items. Within an hour, everyone had packed up and placed their belongings in their cars. As we drove away from the massive cabin, I couldn't help but feel like those same small white eyes were watching us from just out of sight. During the ride home, my boyfriend was quiet. When we had stopped to get gas, I tried to ask my boyfriend why he had left, but he just looked at me and said that it was hard to explain. Even after they had dropped me back off at my campus apartment, I wondered if the reason the trip had been canceled was because of the figure that I had seen that night, as well as the dreamlike state everyone had woken up in. Up until we broke up, I would ask my ex why the trip had been cancelled, and he never really gave me a direct answer. He would just say that I wouldn't understand, or that it was a family dispute. It wasn't until after we broke up that I saw a documentary on skinwalkers. It made me shudder to think what would have happened if I had opened that door and walked outside.